Love You More Than Chocolate, written by Drew Grimm, read by Drew Grimm. The Hershey family sat around their long black walnut dining table, each member either on their phone or politely making conversation with whoever sat next to them. Thomas Hershey glared at his sister Lucy and tried to kick her under the table. When he failed to do so, he settled on flicking a piece of table bread at her. Lucy kept her face in her phone and settled on giving Thomas the middle finger in response. The two siblings, who were now in their late 20s, were very mature. Their father, George, stood from the table and clanked his glass to gather everyone's attention. Thomas rolled his eyes, anticipating the same droll family speech his father always gave this time of year. Lucy didn't even bother to take out her earbuds. She would just smile and occasionally nod her head in her father's direction until his mouth stopped moving. George began his speech and slowly made his way to the far end of the table to his elderly mother, June. She was the reason everyone had gathered here today, marking her 85th birthday. June was a tiny, shrunken shell of herself, but the tough old woman still carried the weight of the family fortune on her back. This alone made sure everyone in the family still attended every gathering and showed proper respect, faked or not. Lucy was listening to her personal playlist, watching her dad as he made his usual rehearsed speech and hand movements. He was such a turtle of a man. Lucy always assumed their ex-limo driver or Toro was her true father. How else did she get such amazing bone structure? When the family butler, Henry, brought in the gifts, Lucy finally took out her headphones. Thomas glared at the gifts with greedy anticipation. After this night, he would no longer be forced to these gatherings any longer. His trust fund would be unlocked, and he would be free from all of this nonsense. He already had the yacht he wanted being held for him in Italy. He doubted he would ever bother returning to the estate again, except maybe to his father's funeral. He had always kept a promise to himself to piss on his dad's grave. June smiled a wide grin as her son began to present her gifts from the family. Having her birthday rest on Valentine's Day had always provided a unique theme to these events. George placed a heart-shaped box full of her favorite chocolates in front of her. George then read out loud the card that came with it. "Dear grandmother, I love you more than chocolate." June smiled at the heart-shaped box and began to open it. Her hands were shaky, but she refused to let George do everything for her. Finally managing to open the lid, she began to scoop the chocolate candies into her mouth. Everyone at the table smiled and silently watched except for Lucy and Thomas. Lucy couldn't hide her disgust as she watched her elderly grandmother mash the chocolate into her face, grinning to everyone as she chewed. The candies were making her teeth look black, and Lucy thought it made the old hag look demonic. The grin on Thomas's face could have been mistaken for politeness, like the others, but to the careful observer, the glint in his eyes revealed something far more sinister. June began to cough slightly, and George rushed to gently pat her on the back, suggesting she slowed down. When it came to his mother, he always made suggestions, never having the balls to tell her directly what to do. The slight cough, however, grew into a full-blown choking fit. June began to spit chunks of phlegm and brown spittle while her son George began to panic and call for the servants. Lucy watched as her grandmother finally gathered herself after spitting chocolate-covered goop everywhere. Her father managed to stop it and get her to start breathing normally again. Lucy looked over to her brother and raised an eyebrow as he frowned at her. George began to dismiss the servants when his mother slowly raised from her chair. George placed his hands gently on her shoulders and began to speak to her like she was a child. "Mother, do you want to go clean up? Bathroom? Bathroom?" George's wife, Beth, snickered at him. "She's not deaf, my darling." The table of family laughed, and George's embarrassed expression was impossible to hide. June faced her son, still standing, and began to slowly smile at him ear to ear. It was a gross sight, to be sure. June had drool flowing from all the corners of her mouth, her teeth stained with chocolate. When she began to say something, she stopped and lurched forward until George caught her. "Mother? Mother? Are you okay?" George frantically called for the servants he had just dismissed. June slowly lifted her head from her son's chest and began to smile again. Instead of trying to speak this time, she instead projectile vomited black bile in a hot stream into George's face, causing the entire family to shriek in surprise. Thomas watched with wide eyes as the disgusting display panned out in front of him. His father began to scream like the woman he was and practically shoved Thomas's grandmother to the floor in panic. The smell of the black bile filled the entire room, and family members began to cover their noses as servants rushed in to do what servants do: clean up messes. Thomas and Lucy evacuated the dining room with most of their cousins and allowed their parents to sort out the mess. Both broke away and made their way to the library, quietly closing the sliding doors shut. Thomas jumped into the air and began frantically fist-pumping. Lucy couldn't help but laugh at her brother's excitement. "Holy fucking shit! Did you see Dad's face?" Thomas began to overact and started rolling around on the library's beautiful Turkish rug. Lucy crossed her arms and waited for her brother to stop gloating. "You said she would slump over and die peacefully, you jackass." Thomas pulled himself off the floor and began to clean his glasses. Who fucking cares? In 24 hours, we'll both be gone from this place and each other forever. Lucy couldn't help but smile. The thought of being in control of her multi-million-dollar trust fund and living off the coast of some beautiful Greek island with one of her boy toys was overwhelming. But the thought of never seeing her family and Thomas again was practically orgasmic. Thomas made a gesture with his nose, asking Lucy for some cocaine. Lucy started to dig in her purse when a servant began banging on the door loudly. Thomas slid the door open a quarter way and angrily stuck out his face. "What the fuck do you want, Henry?" Thomas had always hated the family butler. In fact, he hated most people, himself most of all. "Your grandmother is awake and recovering in the living room. Your father has requested everyone's presence immediately, Master Thomas." Thomas slid the door shut and turned to face Lucy, grabbing his hair and mouthing, "What the fuck?" Lucy gathered herself quicker and casually walked over to Thomas, slapping him in the face and telling him to calm down. The two co-conspirators then left the library and made their way to the living room in silence. The grand room was packed with family members bickering at each other, everyone trying to yell over one another. Thomas could make out accusations being tossed around, with some family members accusing and others denying. To his disbelief, he could see his grandmother sitting by the fireplace, rocking back and forth in her favorite chair. Lucy's mind was racing with ideas of what to do next. She didn't have to worry about Thomas breaking or confessing. He was all in like she was. She started to calculate how long it would take the paramedics to reach Hershey Estate when her father began to take charge of the room. Please, everyone calm down. Nobody is saying poison. We just want to know who gave the chocolates in the heart-shaped box." Lucy and Thomas watched as George began to ramble and stutter in his attempt to get to the bottom of things. Everyone in the room was so fixated on him speaking, they didn't notice June get up from her rocking chair. They didn't notice her walk over to the mantel on the wall, holding medieval battle axes. They didn't notice her pick one from its holder. They didn't notice her creep behind her son while he was still speaking. When she swung the axe downward into George's skull, however, they did notice. Lucy's scream was loud and sharp. It was the kind of scream only pure shock and surprise can give you. Detective Cummings sat at his desk across his partner and eagerly opened the toxicology report. The Hershey Estate axe murders were the biggest and strangest case that he had ever worked. 12 family members and 5 servants were hacked to death by an elderly 85-year-old woman on her birthday. They knew that 2 of the grandchildren had attempted to poison her from a deathbed confession from the granddaughter. Cummings began to read the report and stood up sharply as he read through the last page. Jesus Christ, that nitwit of a grandson tried to poison her with amphetamines. It mixed with her heart medication and basically turned into PCP in her bloodstream. The phone on Detective Cummings' desk rang out, and he answered it while tossing the report to his partner. "She's awake and speaking? Are you serious? What is she saying?" "Uh-huh. Well, keep her awake. Me and Jones can be there in 20 minutes, depending on traffic." Cummings hung up the phone and glared at his partner. "That tough old bird is awake and coherent. She actually made it through without her heart exploding." Jones shook his head in disbelief. "They won't be able to bring a case against her, not after reading this." "Did she say anything when she woke up?" "Yeah," said Cummings. "She said, 'I love you more than chocolate.'"